Rossini and his cronies is all everybody wants these days. No?
Italians.
It's this paralytic regime. It allows no freedom of expression, no freedom of thought. What?
Walls have ears.
London's the only place to be now, Stefan. You see, the English, they would never tolerate spies. Or censors.
Please.
Of course I don't want any wine, Schindler. Doctor's orders. Can't hear. Can't drink, can't shit. Thank God poor Beethoven can compose. Eh? Eh?
No, the problem wasn't so much that he was loud, but that he was never discreet, even during those dangerous years after the wars. But somehow he would always get away with it. Perhaps because people started to think that he was going a little crazy, a benign madman. Of course, he was nothing of the sort.
An eccentric, certainly. He could shock people in the street. And in certain details, he was very, very particular. Coffee, for example, is essential nourishment. He would prepare himself. His procedure, worthy of the Orientals. 60 beans precisely, and of course, they had to be counted out.
48, 50, 52...
In 1822, Beethoven received a commission for a new symphony from London's Philharmonic Society. It had been over a decade since he'd written his last, the eighth, but he was in fact already thinking about creating
2 great symphonies, each different from each other, and each different from all my other ones. I dread beginning works of this magnitude, you see. Well, once I've started, it's... everything's fine.
Once again, Beethoven was thinking in terms of a pair of symphonies. But continuing ill health prevented him from going to England as he'd hoped, and it wasn't London that saw the premiere of his Ninth Symphony.
Carl's school fees are due.
Schindler, listen to this. Do not allow your latest offspring to appear as foreigners. Appear soon among your friends, your admirers, your venerators. I think that's very beautiful. To put on a concert of my newest works in Vienna. No? Come on, Schindler. We're going for a walk. We might actually be able to make some money.
Naturally, there was an immense amount to organise before such a concert could take place. And in that, I was, as always, there to assist.
Well, just tell the scribes to copy my score exactly as I've written it down. And we still need a hall. We'd better write to Dietrich Stein. See what he can do.
Really exciting about the opening of the Ninth Symphony is how the music emerges from nothing, from the dawn of time, as it were.
And this sense of high drama was enthusiastically seized upon by many later composers. Out of the darkness there shall be light.
Dietrich Stein says no. Well, then find another hole, Schindler. These expenses. I mean, the copyist bills alone. How many copyists do we need? Fine. Then, Schindler, tell them that I asked them to copy out the words and the music as they were written, and I find they've done almost exactly the opposite. It's almost as though they've done it on purpose. Of course they can play it. And we must make sure they get the speed right. It's an excellent invention, isn't it?
Very useful.
We've been at it for weeks. Day and night, that phony, vulgar wretch, Schindler. I'm as roasted as this veal. But wait till you hear it, Stefan. Wait till you hear it.
The premiere of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony would become a milestone in musical history. With this massive work, Beethoven raised Western music to an unprecedented level of urgency, power, and meaning. In its final movement, in the most direct and public way, he would share his belief in humankind and a universal brotherhood through a setting of Schiller's Ode to Joy. For the first time, a symphony included voices.
Lasst uns angenehm anstimmen und Freuden feurer. Freude, 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 schöner Götterfunken, Tochter aus Elysium, wir betreten neue Trunken, himmlischer dein Heiligtum, deine Zauberbilder wieder, was die Mode streckt, alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel feiert, deine Zauberbilder wieder, was die Mode streckt, alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel feiert.
Nearly 200 years after it was written, this symphony remains the ultimate musical symbol of our faith in an inclusive world. And it's an appalling irony that the one person excluded from that utopian moment of its premiere was the composer himself.
I don't think he heard a note of it. He even needed me to tell him how often the audience had burst into applause. How the police commissioner had to quieten them between movements. How there was not the slightest disturbance in the quietest passages. But I never expected him to be so moved by such a reception.
This concert closed a chapter in Beethoven's life. It was his last public appearance in Vienna and his last public statement as a composer.
Beethoven's inexhaustible genius has shown us a new world, revealing magical secrets of a holy art which we had never before heard or even imagined.
It didn't make me any money, did it? Schindler, your presence irritates me. I don't want you sitting at my table. Go!
Yes, the concert was a success. But he made much less money than he had hoped. And he thought I had cheated him. So for a while I didn't work for him, which was unfortunate, because he had only his nephew to take my place.
Of course, I'll be needing some blotting paper, some chocolate, to my bowels. Get them when you go into town. And I've got to study. Well, of course you've got to study. Gained in life without diligence.
Nothing.
Nothing.
You have no idea.
Unless, of course, you prefer to squander the hours. All your evenings with that nine-nets. The billiard table. Drinking. Probably whores. Keep up!
Beethoven got no better in that respect as he grew older. Suspicious, jealous, easily offended, easily hurt, easily angered, and yet still so full of warmth and trust and generosity.
And you'll be going this evening, drinking or gambling?
Of course, it was much harder for Karl than the rest of us. After nearly 10 years of existing between those extremes, he couldn't possibly have known just how much his uncle cared for him.
Money from this apartment.
Karl, it must be examination time soon.
Money?
Yes, sir, in 2 weeks.
Well, good luck.
Real poverty, of course, always deserves our sympathy, but that young man, he lacks both poise and manners. Where's Stephen? Oh, my little baby. Little trouser button.
Well, sweet.
He's cruel! And he's common. He doesn't deserve your friendship.
I have to go.
Where are you going? Come back! Come back! You'll be back here at 8 o'clock in the morning! I've got things for you to do! Terrible, haven't we? Child.
Do something for me. Take the boy out one evening and see if he's any good at billiards.
After the huge canvases he'd used for the Mass and the Ninth Symphony, Beethoven now turned back to the most intimate musical form.
In his final group of 5 string quartets, Beethoven was determined to take the form as far as it could go. And I think these pieces prove that he wasn't the first great romantic, as the history books often term him, but rather the last great classicist. It's as if he's saying, I represent the end of the road for the classical string quartet, and beyond me, there's only an abyss. Anybody who wants to write a string quartet now will have to find a new way. He's deliberately closing a chapter in musical history.
The great B-flat major quartet is built from a sequence of 6 movements rather than the usual 4. It focuses on extremes of contrast both within and between movements, and extremes were exactly what characterized his relationship with Carl.
I mean, you don't know what it's like. Endless demands. And I'm never good enough. His son must be exceptional. And I'm not. And then there's my mother. I mean, she's my mother.
Lying to me. Don't lie to your father. This is your mother's poison still in you. What? You've no idea the sacrifice it takes to become a decent human being. Just get out! Go on, get out! Carl! Carl! Come back. Carl?
Don't do this to your father. Your father that loves you.
The absolute extreme of Beethoven's aggressive brutality exists, for me, in the last movement of this B-flat quartet. The Grosse Fuge is a relentless 15-minute assault on both the performers and the audience. In its insanely ambitious technical demands, it was also an assault on the composer. In his uncompromising self-expectation, we can hear Beethoven doing to himself exactly what he did to Carl.
Like that monster that spawned you. Stop it!
I shall never forget his face when he told me. My Karl has shot himself. The grief he felt was indescribable. What made it worse was that when they found the boy, he asked for his mother.
What reason did you have?
Tired of life.
You are tired of life?
My uncle tormented me too much. He tried to make me a better person. He only made me worse. Tell my uncle I want to hear nothing about my mother that is derogatory.
When Karl left hospital 2 months later, Beethoven's response was unusually well judged. He took him to the country to recuperate, and for the first time allowed him to decide on his own future, a career in the army. It was during this visit that Beethoven wrote his last piece of music, a new final movement for the B-flat quartet to replace the Grosse Fuge, which had so bewildered audiences and been pronounced unplayable by professionals. Having gone to the absolute extreme, Beethoven was now ready to pull back. In this brilliantly witty movement, the work finds a gentler resolution. Through this ultimate crisis, I think, Beethoven had finally found some sense of personal equilibrium.
Karl recovered, and he was due to join his regiment. They arrived back in Vienna in the middle of winter, after a terrible journey in an open carriage. Well, I could see straight away how ill Ludwig was. He'd caught pneumonia. But he'd been ill so often over the past 10 years, none of us suspected that he would hardly leave his bed again.
It is Diabelli sent me. This is the house that Haydn was born in. Such a great man. Such a humble little place. Where shall we put it? Shall we put it there? With Karl? Gerhard? What do you think of my Karl in his uniform? From the Prussian king, I had hoped for a decoration.
No decoration could make you greater than you are without it.
After Karl left, it was one thing after another. And there was an operation attempted to relieve the great quantity of fluid that had collected in his abdomen. And the procedure only drained the fluid, it didn't stop it from coming, so the wound had to be kept open. became infected. He suffered appallingly.
The strength for another operation.
Perdite amici. Comedy finites.
What did you say?
Applaud, my friends. The comedy is over.
Progressively advancing liver disease and kidney failure left Beethoven in a coma. 2 days later, in the middle of a thunderstorm, he died. Within hours of his death, a monumental mythology was already starting to take shape around him. The world wanted to take possession of Beethoven. 2 days after he died, souvenir hunters removed every last lock of hair from his head. The day after that, over 20,000 people attended his funeral, the largest that had ever been held in Vienna. Karl, stationed in Moravia, did not return for the ceremony. No one composer has had such an overwhelming impact upon musical history. The vast explosion of musical development across the 19th century simply could not have been without Beethoven. To me, it's very clear that he closed the chapter called Classicism, making it not just possible, but essential that from now on, composers must follow their own path.